So more and more big ships were firing at us. And I asked the skipper before I went up to my place in the director, I said, Captain, please let's not go down before we fire our torpedoes. He said, oh, I'll do the best I can. There you go.
As American forces approach the Philippines, Admiral Ozawa of the Imperial Japanese Navy faces a problem. The Japanese had already tried to stop one American invasion force, but that had resulted in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, also known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and the latter name gives you an idea of just how well that had gone. Now, an even larger American task force was approaching a target even closer to the Japanese home islands. And so Admiral Ozawa split his forces into three. The Northern Force, led by Ozawa himself, their entire purpose was to decoy Halsey into heading north after them. The destruction of the landing forces would fall to the two other groups. At the very southern end was the Southern Force, and this consisted of the old battleships Fuso and Yamashiro, who simply weren't fast enough to keep up with the center force, led by Admiral Kurita. This consisted of pretty much every major Japanese surface warship that had a substantial amount of speed to it, and at the head of it all were the giant battleships Yamato and Musashi. The center force had a very substantial escort consisting of most of Japan's still afloat heavy cruisers, as well as several flotillas of destroyers. The objective was for Ozawa, as said, to decoy Halsey north. Center force would then pass through the San Bernardino Strait and head south, and hopefully wreak havoc on the US landing groups. This battle line could, in theory, actually be a substantial threat even to the large battle line of American fast battleships present off of the Philippine coast, and would have a very good chance of punching through the older standard type battleships which were present for shore bombardment.
So on the 24th of October, as this center force is working its way through the Sibuyan Sea, Admiral Kurita is sighted. Admiral Halsey's carriers launched multiple strikes. At twilight, Admiral Kurita's force is actually turned back and is heading to the west, and that's basically the last thing that Admiral Halsey is aware of. But he thinks he's won the battle. Japanese surface forces retreating. Halsey thinks they've done way more damage than they actually have. The Japanese carriers to the north have been trying real hard to be spotted because their purpose is to be a decoy. And they finally are late on the 24th. And Admiral Halsey, in what may be the most second-guessed decision in the history of the Pacific War, goes after those carriers, and he takes everything with him, his entire force.
Kurita did double back. He hadn't, in fact, intended to return to Japan. That turn away was simply a tactical maneuver. So now he was passing through the San Bernardino Straits unopposed. The only thing that stood between them and the ability to shoot up the American supply and transport and troop ships and possibly even shell the troops ashore was a handful of destroyers, destroyer escorts, and escort carriers that made up three task units, the northernmost of which was Task Unit 3, also known as Taffy 3, and on paper it stood zero chance against the onrushing Japanese juggernauts. And indeed, when the Japanese forces were spotted, it did seem like any fight would be short and swift. But of course, this would only be the opening moves of what would become known as the Battle of Samar.
I was on watch at the time, so I can remember I was in combat. That's around where the radars were, and I was standing the watch down there rather than on the bridge, and ordering a scrambled egg sandwich to be made up for me, brought to me.
Yeah, Clint Carter was another gunner's mate, probably a couple years older than my father. And according to Clint's recollection and my father's recall of it as well, he said that Clint was there and they're looking at the radar and they kept seeing these two big masses of noise on the radar.
One of the radarmen said, "Come over here, Mr. Hagen, see what's coming on the computer. You've heard of a blip. Well, this is a blip. I've never seen anything that big before on a computer scope, showing up at about 45,000 yards."
Things happen really, really quick. The dawn patrol sights the Japanese and reports probably unspeakable words that the entire Japanese Navy is coming down. About that time, the Taffy 3 starts sighting Japan, and then shells start falling. It's all happens within a few minutes. The destroyer that is closest to the Japanese force happens to be the Johnston.
What was your skipper's name?
Ernest Evans. And so his friends called him chief. We did not. I called him captain. But he was a very easy going, but a natural fighting man. What that consists of, I don't know, but he had it, whatever it was.
When the ship was commissioned, he had made the statement that he will never run from a fight. He also said that this is going to be a fighting ship to go in arm's way, a la John Paul Jones, and anyone who doesn't want to go should get off now, and no one did. But anyway, he's true to his word. Before receiving orders from Admiral Sprague, Ernest Evans points the Johnston, towards the Japanese force.
He started, gave the order, first thing, all hands to general quarters, left full rudder, all engines ahead and full. And then we were attacked by the Jap fleet, be ready to start making smoke right off the bat. And he made this magnificent speech that did everything exactly right.
And for a time, you have this huge Japanese force coming this way and one destroyer going that way.
Commander Evans turned Johnston directly toward the first immediate threat he saw, and that was the line of cruisers coming to attack Taffy 3, led by the cruiser Kumano.
And it's actually away from the battleships, away from the cruisers somewhat, because he found an opening. That this is a rare feeling. You're starting off from about 30,000, and here you're rushing to all alone. The other ships are all making smoke by this time and hide each other, and even the carriers start making smoke. The admiral, so he was saying, all planes, wherever, launch them, get rid of them. They didn't, but what were they loaded with? It didn't matter.
Sprague knows that if there's a Japanese force there, there's no way his escort carriers can outrun it. So he knows from the very beginning that they're in deep trouble. So he turns into the wind to get as many aircraft off the carrier's decks as they possibly can. And none of them have the right weapons because they weren't expecting to fight a major Japanese force. Some of them don't have enough gas to get anywhere, but they actually will play a role in this battle.
Now, once we hit 18,000 yards, I probably shouldn't have started this early. I gave the signal, commence firing, and they were all doing that as fast as they could. It appeared that we were hitting this cruiser.
Now, most of the weapons on those ships are actually anti-aircraft shells. So even if 5-inch armor piercing aren't going to do much against battleships and heavy cruisers, but the anti-aircraft shells actually probably work better in that they decimate the anti-aircraft gunners on board these Japanese ships. But you have these small destroyer escorts engaged in a melee, smoke screens very effectively, but up against battleships and heavy cruisers, it's just a completely unfair fight.
As we're approaching 12,000, I'm talking to the captain, or listening in with him, and he's talking to that. I'm about ready to fire. We'll wait a little while. So he finally started firing at 8,000 yards. Yes, and I'm a nervous wreck by this time. I thought he was taking undue chances, but we're firing as fast as we can, so there's nothing more I can do. And we continued until all 10 torpedoes are fired. We're starting to, then we start saying, well, how many hits did we make? I'm not paying attention. The captain isn't either, because I'm still firing as much as we can, and he's trying to see that we get the hell out of there.
Dodging shells as he came in, got in close, fired all 10 of his torpedoes, blowing the bow off Kumano.
One of the torpedoes hit the bow of the Japanese cruiser.
Kumano's sister ship, Suzuya, stopped to assist the wounded Kumano and, in effect, stalled that cruiser line. Right after Johnston fired her torpedoes, she got hit by 2 salvos, one from Yamato's primary armament and one from her secondary armament, which basically knocked Johnson out of the fight momentarily.
When this shell exploded, it damn near wiped out the bridge. I was standing in the doorway on the port side. The concussion or the explosion blew me across the bridge, approximately a distance of 30 feet. It was like being hit in the rear, and the whole ship tail went down and almost went out of the water with such force.
But then a rain squall came over, and Johnston's crew was able to get her back at least to half capacity. Sprague realizes that the Japanese are gaining on him, and he orders the Wolves to attack. The escorts of this group are 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, which are smaller than the destroyers. He orders the whole of the Heermen to follow after Johnston and essentially sacrifice themselves to buy time for his carriers to get as many aircraft in the air as they can. The Samuel B. Roberts, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Copeland, is technically one of the Little Wolves, but it's also one of the destroyer escorts that has still retained its torpedo bank, 3 torpedo tubes, while others have had that replaced by supplemented anti-aircraft weapons. And so Copeland decides that since he's got torpedoes, he's going in with the other 2 destroyers. So these 3 ships go in to attack the Japanese. Evans takes his, by then already badly damaged ship out of the rain squall to support those other 4 ships.
We were slowed to half speed. The whole after engine room and fire room were knocked out, and we never did get any power back there. We lost all steering control on the bridge, so we were steering by hand. 6 or 8 men would take 5-10 minutes at a time going down there and turning the ship. The captain was constantly turning, they call it zigzagging through the
Right.
thinking he was evading something. I never knew whether that actually worked or not.
Heerman's torpedo attack in particular causes the Yamato to actually turn away to avoid those torpedoes. They generally, all of them lasted more than an hour in the fight. And, the Johnston is kind of more famous than the others, but what she did and Heerman were every bit as heroic. Roberts, when it was going into the battle, the commanding officer, Copeland, came over the 1MC, or the public address system, and said, "We are going into battle against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected." Probably the last thing anyone wants to hear, before going into a fight. But it was, he was telling the truth to his crew.
We were about half the time we were running away just like the carriers were. And then we'd run and he'd turn around like this. We'd fire a few rounds and come back. But almost all of it was we were firing over my shoulder, so to speak. Everyone was slowing down for twist and turning, and we were getting hit more and more, and our maximum speed was down to 17 knots too. And probably the reason any of these ships are survived as long as they did is that the Japanese think they're up against bigger ships than they actually are. When they're firing armor-piercing shells, which go clean through these small destroyers and destroyer escorts,
the heavy cruisers close in. They start, hitting some of the escort carriers. Gambier Bay gets hit bad enough that she falls behind and starts to drop. The Japanese destroyers are closing in uh, on the uh, on the escort carriers.
Of course, I ended up with two guns that could follow orders, follow me, two forward guns. We were fighting a group of enemy ships that had one cruiser and four destroyers. And the captain was assaulting this one, trying to cross the T and all that, and I'm firing one gun, two guns. Who's this guy kidding? He said, by God, we're going to cross the T. Well, about that time, gun number two was hit.
You've educated me on the relationship that Commander Evans and my dad would have had, mainly because of their mutual respect for each other and being the only two officers aboard that had seen any real battle experience.
Oh yeah, Johnston crew was green. Now by Samar, the crew had been indoctrinated in battle. Yeah, so your dad had Evans's respect and I believe his trust as well.
And even at this moment, Johnston has been hit multiple times again, but is still afloat and still fighting. Ernest Evans has been badly wounded, but he's still commanding the ship. He's the bridge has been essentially destroyed, and he's on the stern shouting orders down to the auxiliary after steering to steer the ship.
We're finally hit again, and everything gets quiet. That means the final engineering space boiler had been struck, so we lost all communications on the ship. It turned into complete silence, eerie.
And at the end, Hull is the first one to go down. Then Roberts goes down. Heerman managed to survive. The destroyer escorts kind of get left out of the battle, but they were in the mix as well. About this time, where it looks like Admiral Kurita has victory in his grasp, he issues a recall, order to basically regroup, because he's running the high speed chase. He's using up fuel, using up prodigious amounts of ammunition, um, and he doesn't know where his forces are. Plus, he's been awake for like 36 hours. Um, and that may be, besides Halsey's decision, that recall is probably the other most second guess decision in the history of the Pacific War, because all of a sudden this Taffy 3 gets away, except for Gambier Bay goes down, Johnston's lost, Hull's lost, Samuel B. Roberts is lost. It's a victory. The other thing about Kurita was he actually was one of the more humane, if you will, of Japanese commanders. And he knew that, if he got into Leyte Gulf, he wouldn't come out, and that he would lose, thousands of sailors on a mission against a bunch of transports. And that played into his mindset, as well, with his decision to, ultimately leave. So, he was pilloried by the Japanese for failure of his mission, second guessed by us for years. But yet he saved the lives of thousands of Japanese sailors by making the decision that he did. So, and then the other thing is that he was getting beat up by these destroyers and particularly the aircraft in the the ships that he lost. So it's not as um, inexplicable decision as it's made out to be. There are a lot of reasons why he did what he did. When Kurita issues the recall order, the Japanese destroyers who think they have the carriers in their sights, they're madder than hell. They think they've been, they think they're about on the verge of victory, and they'd been recalled by Kurita. And by this time, Johnston is in pretty much sinking condition. And as the Japanese destroyers are withdrawing, they're pouring fire, and she's taking hit after hit after hit.
So right toward the end of Johnston, we do have an eyewitness account of Johnston just before she sank. And for that, I'm going to turn to the words of Commander Copeland, the commanding officer of the USS Samuel B. Roberts, destroyer escort, who also, like Johnston, drove into the teeth of the big guns of the Japanese surface force and did not survive the battle, but she played a role of spoiler that ultimately is what determined victory against the Japanese. So in Commander Copeland's own words,
just about that time, the destroyer Johnston came by us, and I saw her for the last time. That picture is engraved in my memory. I can see her right now. She had taken a terrific beating. Her bridge was battered and had been abandoned. Her foremast, a steel tubular mast coming up just abaft of the bridge superstructure, had been split from shell fire and bent down over itself. You remember when we were kids in school, how we made those paper Japanese lanterns by slotting them? Well, the mast was just that way, doubled over on itself and dangling down with its radar swinging just like a pendulum on a clock. It gave me a hurt feeling to look at her. Her searchlights had been knocked off, one torpedo mount was gone, and her number 3 gun had completely disappeared. As she went by, she was limping along at a pretty slow speed. I saw her captain. He was a very big man with coal-black hair. His name was Evans. I had met him at some of those conferences. He was standing on the fantail conning his ship by calling down an open scuttle hatch into the steering engine room. I can see him now. He was stripped to the waist and was covered with blood. His left hand was wrapped in a handkerchief. I heard later that 3 fingers had been completely shot off. I also heard that his right cheek had been practically shot away. That accounted, I suppose, for the blood. As he went by, he wasn't over 100 feet from us as he passed us on the starboard side. He turned a little and waved his hand at me. That's the last I saw of him, because Johnston was sunk too, a few minutes after we were.
when I first read this, I thought that this was a genuine account of the condition that Johnston was in right before the end. But as I paid closer attention to it, not all of it rang true. Talk about the number 3 5-inch gun mount that completely disappeared off of the supposed Johnston. Vulcan found the 5-inch gun in the debris field that was later identified as belonging to Johnston. And so it obviously was not gone before she sank. The mast being broken in two. Yes, in the debris field, Vulcan found Johnston's mast, and it was bent over like that. The 46-centimeter shells hitting Johnston were so violent that the air search radar at the top of the mast snapped off and fell past his battle station, what he nicknamed the whirling bed spring. This does not match Commander Copeland's description of this battered ship. It seems as though the air search radar is still at the top of the mast. One of her torpedo mounts, he says, was gone. We see both torpedo mounts on the Johnston wreck. What I suspect happened here is that Commander Copeland witnessed not just the Johnston. It's evident that he witnessed Johnston toward the end because he saw Commander Evans on the stern commanding the ship, and we would later find the Johnston and the Samuel B. wrecks within a few hundred meters of each other on the ocean floor. I think that he did see Johnston, but I think he also saw Hull. And it's very conceivable, since Samuel B. Roberts went in on the attack with Hull, that he saw her as well. And we do have eyewitness testimony from Hull that said that her entire number 3 mount was torn off the ship as though it by a blowtorch, I think was the exact quote. And her mast also could have been broken with the air search radar atop it, as Commander Copeland said. So I think what we have in Commander Copeland's description is kind of a combined memory of Hull and Johnston together, and that he remembers now as Johnston because that was the last image. And of course, Commander Evans waving to him from the fantail is an image that burned into the memory.
But there was another story that I came across in the survivors' accounts. It was a book that was written in the 80s of all the survivors, basically telling their stories of where they were. And there was this mention of a depth charge going off.
Okay.
And again, I had the opportunity to ask my dad, very directly, and as he always liked to do. And rule number one of a gunnery officer during a ship-to-ship battle is you make sure your depth charges are set to safety. You don't want them going off if you have to abandon ship.
That's true.
Said, well, he must have missed one.
When we got off the ship, we were paddling somewhat to get away from it, but we were in groups. As the ship was going down, big explosion aboard. Years later, I figured out what it probably was, that we had some depth charges in a storage rack on the second deck of the ship. And I don't think any of us thought about those. And one of those had been knocked off of safety onto a setting of 50 or 100 feet, and it got back at us.
So he's in the water at this point, and floating around. There's still chaos happening all around him when one of the depth charges go off, and he basically described it as the largest imaginable enema shooting up his derriere, and all he could think was, what a way to start my experience in the ocean. So,
and as survivors went into the water, the Japanese destroyer Yokakaze slowly motored through the men in the water.
They prepared to be shot down, all of them just being massacred. And instead, the ship went broadside, and the captain or the captain and the men saluted, because this one ship had been so valiant in all that it was doing.
The Japanese, respected that kind of courage and bravery that ship had shown, it's actually pretty amazing.
There was a sense of valiance that Johnston had in that as it went in and out of these squalls, the Japanese thought it was like 2 or 3 ships.
Ernest Evans is forced to give, abandoned ship call. He is last seen on the fantail. Maybe he made it into the water, maybe he didn't. But he's never seen again, after that.
In that when they finally called abandoned ship, somebody pushed my father, because my father never learned how to swim. They had kapocks, and there were planks that they held on to. And my father tells a story that for the first 24 hours, Clint sort of held my father's head out of the water. And so I've had a chance. I know his son as well. So I've had a chance to get to know them and thank them for saving my father's life. And then after 24 hours, neither one of them have a recollection of what happened.
So the next thing is in the water, what the hell do I do next? I don't know anything about this. So I start swimming aft with the life jacket on, but I'm looking for that wonderful chief bosun mate. And I swam up to him and said the same thing. What do we do now, chief? This was his bailiwick. And he said, well, we ought to do this. I said, go ahead and tell him. He got the life, what life rafts we got off the ship, managed to get them together. Boy, you get 2 life rafts together in the water's fishing line between them, and then just reel in each other. I had no idea how to do that, but he did, and I said, well, that's a good idea. Then we had about 3 floater nets. They're just water or rope mixed in a big old pattern, and you can put your foot through it and have 8 or 10 people on this floater net. As long as you don't get too many in there. If you get too many in there, that sinks.
Right.
But if you spread out, you can sleep and still stay with the group. So they're a very valuable thing.
And my dad was very routine oriented. Everything every night his shoes went in the same place. Every night his pants went in the same place, and he ate dinner at the same time every night. He read the newspaper in the same way. He was very regimented. And one of the things that was just hard for me to fathom, but at the same time I can see him doing, is one of the stories from when they were abandoning ship. My dad talked about how he stopped before jumping in the water, sat down, untied his shoes, took each one of them off, put them down on the ship before jumping in the water. And it's hard for me to fathom in the chaos that must have been ensuing that he had the wherewithal to stop and do that. Now, when they were rescued roughly 54 hours later, my dad wished he had kept his shoes on because his feet were quite sunburnt. And that was one thing that he said, and if he had done things any differently, he would have jumped in the water with his shoes on. So, but he had a very harrowing experience. Talked a lot about how many men they lost in the water, and it was very hard on him.
It went on like that for 50 hours.
You were in the water 50 hours?
50 hours, yes. And I pronounced, crew had notified the chief when they thought someone was dead in some place. Chief would come get me, and I'd go over and check the pulse and put my ear to their mouth to see if they're alive or not. If I considered them dead, I'd say, okay, he's dead, take off his life jacket, give it to someone that doesn't have one, throw him over the side. And I did that about 40, 45 times. And no checking for identification or anything. just we were surviving. And, second day, I say, most surely we'll be picked up today. And that got pretty grim all day long. Planes had flown over us and waved and tilted their wings at us. They knew we were out there, but they didn't pick us up for 50 hours, and we lost a lot of those people were just killed.
And then they waited and they waited, and men died, and more men died, and then they finally came. But by then, their exposure in the water was probably I think I looked at my father's his Purple Heart and all those other things that he got were primarily because of injuries that occurred not just in the battle, but in the water of waiting.
Bill Mercer may have been a master of understatement, because he said one time, "I'm still a little peeved at the Navy."
Johnston saying the survivors went into the water and they would end up being there for 53 hours. They wouldn't know it at the time, but ultimately they went through everything that someone's lost at sea without a ship could experience during that time. Shark attacks, saltwater ingestion, hallucination, dehydration, those who were wounded have their wounds open to the sea. It's just horrible, horrible, horrible.
My father tells a story that when they were in the water, they tell you, don't get any water, don't drink seawater. And he says, the first day you get water in your mouth and you spit it out. By the end of that first day, you're sipping it a little bit. By the second day, you're drinking it, you can't drink enough. And so there was a lot of hallucination that went on in the accounts of these different things. And it was quite disturbing.
Elton, my uncle, on the second night, apparently Elton was hallucinating, maybe drinking salt water, and Elton started to swim off, saying that he had important information that he had to get through to the captain, and he was going to meet him on that island way over there. Himchek, in his recording, says he called out, "Elton, Elton, come back, come back." But Elton was a strong swimmer. Off he swam, and never to be seen again. So whether he just drowned or whether he was taken by a shark, we don't know. But it's a sad ending, because the next morning, the rescue came and the guys were picked up. And who knows, Elton probably would have survived.
Clint Carter was also injured by a shark through his kapok, and he didn't know it till he was rescued. They discovered when they took off his clothes, he had teeth marks on both sides of his torso.
Some said that they would look down into the water as they were hanging onto the life raft, and here were a bunch of those big guys circling around down below, and often enough they would come up and hit one of the men, and you'd hear a scream, and then there'd be silence. And it must have been just horribly fearful to know that those guys were lurking, and especially at night, you couldn't see them.
My father said you'd be, bobbing up and down. All of a sudden, somebody would just disappear next to you, and they were gone.
That's one of the things that's always been interesting to me with my dad account of the story, where he talked about how at one point he started to float off from pure exhaustion and but managed to come together and swim back to the rafts and but how many other men just out of just pure exhaustion just started swimming off, and everybody tried to do what they could, but I mean they were just also exhausted in the water. So
Bob Hollenbaugh had a nice story. He talked about one of the survivors who did just that. He kind of fell asleep and he drifted away, and Hollenbaugh swam out and got him and brought him back and brought him back to the life raft. And after a little while, this guy fell asleep and he drifted away again. And Hollenbaugh swam after him again and got him. And this time he brought him back and he tied that guy onto the life raft with his belt. And I asked Hollenbaugh about that later on, because this survivor, whose name I kind of lost, said he was so grateful to Hollenbaugh. He saved my life. Hollenbaugh saved my life. I asked Hollenbaugh about that in later years, and he said, Warren, he said that was no big deal. I thought, wow, it's no big deal saving a guy's life. If that's not the definition of a hero, it's hard to find one.
And it was almost 2 days before they even started looking for us. And they were about ready to get through picking up people this day when they fortunately found us. They were actually on their way in. They picked up a whole flock of people. And at noon on this one day, they said, "Oh yes, there's a few more over here." So they came, and it was classical. I had the idea, I should get right along and get up there and go report to the skipper who we were, all this stuff. So I'm just as anxious to get out of the water as everyone else. I guess I'm able to get to the nets that you climb up to get out of the water. Well, I started getting out of the water, and no way. I still had my life jacket off. I said, "Well, I sure as hell don't need this." So I got it, lost my place, took off the life jacket, tried again. And I'm pulling up, and I'm about 3/4 the way out of the water. And I thought, I don't know whether I go, make it. And some big old burly seaman reached down, grabbed me by the crotch of my pants. I landed in a dump on the deck, and I couldn't even get up. He didn't hurt. I was very appreciative up here, but I said, I tried to get up, but I couldn't, so I crawled over to the bulkhead, sat where I could lean back against that. And I said, "Well, surely the strength will come back."
This guy was saying on that third morning, he saw off in the distance a ship. A ship was coming, and of course, it's not clear whether it's one of ours or maybe an unfriendly. So they're not sure if they should wave and attract attention or not. But it seemed like their life expectancy was getting shorter and took the risk of waving. And as that ship came closer, he saw, oh, yes, he said, it's one of ours. He saw the American flag. And he said, I knew that I was going to be saved and that we're going to be okay. And he said, this was the greatest moment of my life. He said it was better than any Christmas. And it was just such an ecstatic moment for him.
Wait. You mentioned enema. That reminds me of another story, kind of related. One of the worst things you can imagine. I can't imagine being stuck, in the ocean like that. But there was this story told by one of the crew members, a seaman first class, who had the nickname Dusty Rhodes. His last name was Rhodes, who, and that's about as American as you could come for a nickname, who said he said it was actually easy to urinate and defecate in the ocean. And he said, and turds will float.
Okay.
He said there was this one huge turd that came floating by, he and a buddy, and there was a third guy there who was kind of asleep. I believe he was hanging onto a floater net. And they were wearing their K-Pock life jackets with these big these big stuffed collars behind him. And he was leaning forward with his neck. So there's a little pool of water in between the back of the K-Pock jacket and his neck. And so Dusty and his buddy kind of herded that turd to float into that space between the K-Pock and his neck. And then they sat back and watched, and the guy woke up and smelled. He goes, smells like shit here. And they had a big laugh. And I'm going, oh my God. In the worst situation you can imagine, these guys were still doing poo jokes.
That is funny. That's very hard to comprehend for sure.
Doesn't that describe the American male to you? What do you think, Molly? So really, what was the worth of the sacrifice that the last stand of the tin can sailors represents? Well, one thing, they kept the Japanese from interdicting MacArthur's liberation of the Philippines. The whole intent of that operation, and the whole reason why the Japanese tried so hard to prevent it, is because they both knew this was the key to the end of the war. By these small, these destroyer escorts for these backwater support units, for them to turn aside really the last major threat that the Imperial Japanese Navy could mount against the American push through the Pacific, what they did was they ensured that MacArthur's invasion of the Philippines continued on schedule. There was no threat to it, and that the Japanese logistics line would be forever severed. As soon as you cut off the Japanese war-making machine from the raw materials that powered it, then the end of the war was foregone. You know, they say that battles are not what wins wars. Logistics is what wins wars. And through the sacrifice of the Taffy 3 escorts, we won a major logistical victory that ensured the end of the war.
When you add up the casualties of Taffy 3, it's over 800 Americans' lives that will be lost. So, you know, it's considered this amazing victory, but it's probably the most costly victory in terms of, you know, for a single day battle for us during the war.
My dad had a very unenviable task as senior surviving officer of the USS Johnston. His responsibility was to send a letter to every sailor who perished, to his family, and to humanize it to a certain extent. And I can't even imagine how difficult this task must have been to write 186 of these letters in a day and time where there were no templates. There was no computers to help you. You had to type it out and do it one at a time. It's so hard for me to try to picture this. But over the years, I've had several of the families of sailors that were killed in action share letters, copies of these letters with me. So I wanted to read one of these letters so you can understand just how difficult it was of a task for my dad to write this for 186 different sailors. Dear Beverly, it is with deep sorrow that I write to you concerning Elton, who, following the sinking of the USS Johnson on October 25th, 1944, was reported as missing in action. I regret to say that we all have been unable to find any further information concerning him. All that we know is that he had abandoned ship uninjured. He was in the water hanging onto the life raft with a group of survivors. During the second night drift, he swam away from the life raft. He still had his life jacket on, but was very exhausted. from both battle fatigue and exposure. Although the battle area was combed by a group of rescue ships for several days, he was never picked up and he has not been heard of since. As we have no further information, we can only list Elton as missing in action. I wish I could offer you some encouragement, but most unfortunately, I can only frankly say I feel there is very little hope for his survival. I know there is little I can say to lighten your burden of grief and anxiety. I only hope you receive some comfort and courage in the knowledge of Elton's brave service to his country. Very sincerely, R.C. Hagan, Lieutenant, U.S. Navy Reserve, Senior Surviving Officer.
I always say I wish I could go back and have one more conversation with him.
Yeah,
'Cause
me
I would
too.
like
Oh,
I would like to have I would like to
yeah,
ask my dad if he had survivor's guilt because
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, surviving Guadalcanal, only officer on the bridge that survived. You
Right.
know, that had to be, you know, so much as it is, and then surviving the Johnston and being senior surviving officer. I mean,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
again,
You know, every individual goes through these kind of traumas differently.
sure,
They're not all the same, and we should never judge anybody from their experience with regards to battles. You know, we don't know what people go through, and to judge them, well, everybody, we're all valiant, warriors, but some of them are just, like my father, probably very, very frightened by it all and thankful to have survived
sure,
and miss people that they may have known.
Um, Elton used to, maybe it was something that military guys did, but in wanting to distance themselves from the horror of war. But he used to send letters back saying, after this is over and I get out, I want to have a little chicken ranch in Oklahoma, which probably seemed just about the most remote you could get from war torn strife in the Pacific. Yeah, the ranch never happened. He was lost at 25. And I regret not getting to know him as an adult. And of course, all the things that he might have been in his life and his family, all those what ifs and things that never happened, which it's true for our family and it's tragic for so many families who serve.
But my father never talked about it hardly at all. Quite a few reunions, and my dad didn't even know about these. So he was telling these things, and he just nonchalantly talking about the injuries and things that were there. And he repeated what is often repeated by survivors: the one guy that had his head blown off. And all of a sudden, in the midst of that, my father turned white as a ghost. We thought he had a heart attack. We rushed him to the hospital. Got him in, a doctor says his heart's fine for what it is. He says, but he has suffered a huge anxiety attack. With that reminiscing, it brought back so many other memories. My father being 18 out on the farm, the carnage that he saw seemed to really, for whatever reason, when Joe reminisced about that, Joe Check, it really bothered him, and I didn't know how much. And from that point on, we could talk about it a little bit because before that, Dad had never been to a reunion, and after that, he went to a couple of them. But at the reunions, it was really, just sort of thankful for each other. There was no animosity or bitterness or anything else. They were just thankful to have made it through. Well, I think as we look at the Johnston and the many other accounts of battles, and you look at the whole idea of what we call the greatest generation, I think they are really an example of that. Everybody stepped up, everybody did their part.
Often in referring to our survivors, we think of them as heroes. Said we'll say such things as what you did was heroic. I remember talking to one of the whole guys about that, and he said, "Listen, I was not being heroic in any way. I was doing my job, I was doing my duty, as we all were." And kind of as if to say, forget about this heroism business.
Yeah, a story I do tell. not related, is actually Samuel B. Roberts. But gunner's mate Paul Carr, uh, the aft 5-inch gun of the Roberts had 325 rounds that they could fire against the Japanese. And they fired 323 of them. The 324th cooked off inside the turret. So the explosion inside the turret killed or mortally wounded everyone except one person who was blown overboard, who amazingly survived. But Carr, when the damage control team came forward, they found him. He slid open from his throat to his groin. I mean, mortally wounded. But he's trying to put that 325th shell into the gun. So they give him morphine, they set him down, come back later, he's back up, still trying to put that shell. That's just incredible.
Unbelievable.
And that was a silver star. If Evans got the posthumous Medal of Honor. Almost every destroyer skipper out there, and then your dad, Navy Cross, all extremely well earned.
I recommended the captain of the ship, Ernest E. Evans, and I checked with the crew on their agreement that we recommend the captain for a Congressional Medal of Honor. And I wrote up a real icky thing about as pleasant a subject as I could. The only trouble I had with it, one of the requirements for recommending someone for a Congressional Medal of Honor is that they don't unduly put their compatriots and the crew in undue danger. Well, I'll tell you, Evans, no way he qualified on that point. I had to overlook that real big. He put us in more damn trouble than you can shake a stick at. So,
Was he ultimately awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor?
And that's why, whimsically, by Navy procedures, what have you, they turned almost automatically to the senior officer. And I was the senior one at this point, and they awarded me the Navy Cross.
Probably should have been a lot more medals of honor, to be honest. But the Navy kind of didn't want to make a big deal initially out of that battle, because the fact that it occurred was the result of a massive command and control breakdown, total screw up. So it was like, well, we'll take the victory, but try not to get into too many details, because it makes both Halsey and Kurita kind of look bad, or not Kurita, but Kincaid.
My dad confided with me one day that he never completely embraced the Navy Cross that he was awarded, because he felt like it was awarded to him after he had nominated Commander Evans for the Medal of Honor.
I certainly give more of the credit to the captain. What I did was follow orders very efficiently and have very few regrets on the thing. Did the best I could.
And, he was not looking for a medal for himself. He was looking for, to honor Commander Evans. And so I'm not sure he ever really, he was honored to have the medal, and in his in his way of being funny, he would kind of joke about if he ever got into a little bit of trouble, he would kind of poke his chest out a little bit, to try to keep the ass chewings to a minimum. But he opened up to me about that, and I just I thought that was very interesting. And he wanted to see Commander Evans honored for his role, and just sort of felt like his award was sort of on his coattails, and that's not what he was striving for.
I would say he earned it.
Obviously, studying battle, I think he, just like you said, there probably everybody deserves some sort of medal.
I remember when I was on Rob Kraft's ship and we were in Iron Bottom Sound off of Guadalcanal. And then he asked me uh, if I could find any ship in the world, which one would you want it to be? And I said, the Johnston. And he went, that's really deep.
I remember particularly talking to Bob Hollenbaugh, again, one of the Johnston survivors, but other survivors as well, about the possibility of ever locating those wrecks years before. And I remember Bob said, Warren, he said, nobody knows exactly where that was. Said there was so much confusion and turmoil of the morning.
So I was introduced to Victor Vescovo when he was planning to dive on Titanic. My name was put in front of him as a so-called Titanic guide to the wreck.
And I've always had an intense interest in military history and especially naval history. And so that was part of my interest in the battlefields of the Pacific, which I ended up discovering several wrecks and exploring several ocean battlefields during the 2020s. I worked with a team that was worldwide, really, all the way from England to the US to Russia to Singapore, to design and build what would be the most advanced deep diving submersible in history. The first one really capable of doing multiple dives to the very bottom of the ocean, Challenger Deep, on successive days.
He would go on his own to find a missing French submarine in the Mediterranean that he worked in conjunction with the French Navy. So the shipwreck exploration bug, I think, hit him around that time.
It started with actually a scientific expedition to the Philippine Trench. There are 4 10,000 meter deep trenches in the world. The Mariana Trench, of course, but also the Philippine Trench. And that had never been visited before. So there was some scientific curiosity of what the character of the trench was like. And so with the Filipino scientific community, I was able to dive to the bottom of the Philippine Trench with Dr. Dio Onda. And so he and I became the first 2 people to the very bottom of the Philippine Trench. We then stayed there for several days and conducted some other scientific missions.
And so he asked me, well, I'm going to be going to these other places. What's there to be found? What hasn't been found? What can be found? What's interesting to look at? So I said, there's only one thing around there, and that's the Battle Off Samar. We have not yet found any of the wrecks, the wrecks of the Johnston, the Hull, the Samuel B. Roberts, or the Gambier Bay. And so they became our targets.
So I made the time allocation to say, after we finish our scientific mission, let's go up to the battlefield and actually try and look for the Johnston.
About that time, Vulcan, which was a group funded by Microsoft founder Paul Allen, had found a debris field in the Philippine Sea, which they identified as that of a Fletcher-class destroyer.
Robert Kraft and his team from Vulcan did great work with a 6,000 meter rated ROV to find some wreckage that appeared to be the Johnston, but there was no direct confirmation with a hull number. They instead looked at some of the equipment and the paint, and they were pretty certain it was the Johnston, as we all were, but it wasn't a hard confirmation.
I took those images to see if I could make a firm determination. And I had an opportunity in May of 2020 during the pandemic to fly out to Baton Rouge to visit the USS Kidd, the only Fletcher-class destroyer left in a World War II configuration.
And one of the reasons for doing that was that if we found the wreck, I believe that it would have been extremely helpful to have a really good sense of where the equipment was, what it looked like, and very importantly, a sense of scale. So I could estimate how long it would take to maneuver around the wreck, get really good video and photographs of both sides.
Not only did I want to study Kidd for possibly what we might see, because the Vulcan debris was just small pieces of a destroyer. Nothing much major left of it. The biggest pieces were some torn up pieces of main deck and the remains of a couple of 5-inch turrets. Other than that, she was torn apart. I had no idea what it would have torn the ship apart that much. And it was in a deep part of the ocean. It was actually deeper than Vulcan's ROV could go, below 6,000 meters, which would make this the deepest shipwreck in the world.
which was great because the submarine that I had an unlimited depth rating. So we could actually follow it down and see what was there. So we didn't know exactly where the wreckage that Robert Kraft and his team found was. They wouldn't disclose that to us for a variety of reasons. We had a general idea.
When you are talking about the deep ocean, you have to know exactly where to dive. Just getting the general area is not usually enough.
And finding a wreck on the ocean floor, people need to realize, is really, really hard because the ocean is enormous and ships are very small by comparison.
So I spent a lot of time before the expedition working with fellow historians, Rob Lundgren and Anthony Tully, to do what we call a renav of the Battle Off Samar. We took the American reports, we cross-checked with the Japanese reports. American reports are based on lat longs, which by experience tells me is very unreliable. Japanese battle reports were based on bearings and ranges. That was a little bit more helpful. And we basically created a new battle track map to show where each ship went during the battle. And that's all great, but it's a map that floats on the surface of the ocean and you have to anchor it somewhere. You have to have some master reference point, which is not available to us. So even a renav was had its limitations.
The other parts of the system are also very important. For example, the ship that the submersible lives on, the pressure drop, had one of the most advanced sonar systems currently in existence on a civilian vessel. With that, we were able to precisely map the trench area. Now, we couldn't find the wreck with the sonar. It was too deep, and you can't distinguish between metal and rock with sonar. People often think you can, but you can't. But what it did allow us to do is to get the really precise topography of the deep ocean. And we knew that the wreckage had been found at a certain depth. And so what we were able to do was plan our mission based on following that depth.
So looking along that depth line, it was a 20-mile line on the western side of the trench. And that's like finding a needle in a haystack, even with that narrowed down that much. But based on our battle track charts, I located an area and said, this is where we'll dive. Went down on the first dive, found nothing.
It turned out on the first one, we actually went the wrong way. We didn't know that, but it was worth a shot. But then we knew where the wreck wasn't. So then we started exploring to the south. And sure enough, I believe on our third dive, we were able to see the wreckage that Robert Kraft and his team found.
But toward the end of the dive, they came across the remains of that emergency steering room that Vulcan had found. This was at the very extreme end of their dive. They already lost a whole bank of batteries, and they're going down on one bank of batteries. They should surface at this point, but they're not. Victor's on the hunt.
We had spent so much time on that particular dive looking for the wreckage and going down the slope that by the time we actually reached the main body of the wreck, the front 2/3 of the ship, I was down to power on only one side of the submersible. So in a way, it was like hopping on one leg. And I wanted to try and find the wreck on that dive because you never know what's going to happen.
All of a sudden, the bow of Johnston comes out of the darkness right at him. He hit her bow on, and he got over to her starboard side of the bow, where he got a good look at the 557 on the bow, which is what Victor was aiming for the whole time, confirmation of the wreck.
And so I was having to very carefully maneuver the sub on basically one engine out of two and get us around the wreck to confirm what it was. We were only down there about 10 minutes with the majority of the wreck on that dive.
A quick survey of the vessel before they had to go ahead and drop their weights and return to the surface.
But fortunately, we were able to surface, recharge all the batteries, and then come back down with Parks Stevenson, a naval historian, and we were able to do a thorough survey of the wreck with multiple passes on each side. And so that is the story of the Johnston. And at the time, that was the deepest shipwreck ever recorded.
They found the Johnston. No wreck has really affected me like Johnston. I can't explain it, but down there I was really struck by the wreck. No, I knew the stories of what happened thanks to the accounts from the survivors that I got from the Johnston Hole Survivors Association, who, by the way, did an amazing thing. They made all of their members in the early 90s sit down and write their memories of the ship. So they've got a nice little collection of these great survivor stories that really helped me in my analysis. But it affected the way that I saw the ship. Late in the battle, a group of the survivors had collected underneath Mount 44, amidships, because it seemed to provide a temporary shelter. And then a Japanese shell went into the group and killed most of them, killed, maimed them, tore them apart, left a pile of bodies there that survivors had to make their way over as the ship was sinking.
And they were just dead bodies all piled up. They're over my head. So I said, I don't have the nerve to go over this. Can you imagine climbing over? So I went over the starboard side, same way. And I said, I can't go over that either.
To me, looking at the wreck, that area was very dark. It was dark. It's like you put a black spot on a filter over that area. Everything else was fine, but just in that area underneath Mount 44, and it wasn't just normal shadow, it just looked dark, and it gave me a very unsettling feeling. And later when I reviewed the imagery, that darkness wasn't there. It was only to my naked eyeball that I saw this. And the same on the starboard side, where I knew the story of, as they were abandoning ship, the doctor of the ship, the pharmacist mate, Doc Brown, was assisting the wounded out of the wardroom, because the officer's wardroom was the surgery during battle.
So I get ready to go over the starboard side and get ready and jump in the water. And thinking, what do I do now? Well, just at that moment, out of the forward part of the ship there, comes the doctor, my buddy, and the chief pharmacist mate was with them. And they came busting out of the wardroom with the body in their hand, with a life jacket on, throwing it over the side. So I rise out of the water. Abandoned ship is an order. He said, okay, Hagen, we'll be out. We got one more man I'll be right with you.
And Doc Brown was helping wounded over the rail and turned to go back in to get another when a Japanese shell went in almost right through the wardroom watertight door.
So they disappeared in the wardroom. Shell follows right in there. They were goners. That's one thing I get particularly. But then after 30 seconds, I said, well, I feel a lot better crying. You know, it's wonderful to cry sometime if you're, too wound up. There wasn't anyone else around. I said, well, I need to get some of the tension out of it.
And maybe my mind did this because I knew what happened there. But again, it is kind of dark in the imagery, but not like what I saw, because there's a gaping hole there left by that shell. So to see these things and knowing the history and tying it all together was very emotional for me. And I ended up playing as we started to run out of battery power and had to leave the wreck. I played It's Been a Long, Long Time, so that basically the wreck could hear it. You know, you're in a submersible underwater, sound travels through the hull, through the water. I'm quite certain the wreck heard it. And now every time I hear that song, to me, it's the Johnston song.
Thanks to the efforts of Parks and Vescovo in their dives to those depths, that some of history was actually rewritten through forensic analysis of the damage and comparing with our records and those of the Japanese, piecing together who was shooting at who from where, and made some new determinations about how the action actually proceeded.
I think I pointed out to you earlier that on the wreck of Johnston, One thing that struck out to me was the damage to that director. I mean, it took a direct hit that the director was actually faced starboard, and it took a shell through its port side that pushed the viewfinder tube completely out of the mount, and it's hanging out the starboard side of the mount. The back of the director housing is blown outward, and you can see shrapnel there. And I'd read your dad's account of abandoning ship, and he got himself and his whole crew out of there. It had to have been before that shell hit. And it places that shell hit to me because he wouldn't have survived that hit.
That was a great experience for me. When we were watching the underwater footage after y'all had found the wreck, and you paused it to show me this, and I had never heard anything about this, and I don't believe my dad knew that the director seat had taken that direct hit even after they'd abandoned ship, and so I think he would have found that incredibly interesting.
Oh yeah,
discovery from the record.
I wish I could have shown your dad that. I think that would have been profound for him.
I do too.
He missed that. He was not meant to die that day.
That's
Japanese did their best to kill him, and he got out.
Wow, that was of all the things on the wreckage for me personally, that was the most interesting, and almost gives me chill bumps to think about it, because I imagine my course of history would have been dramatically changed.
Yeah.
Here we had a chance to see it, and she is still partially in remarkably good condition, considering how her final day was spent, and the fact that she is situated upright and with the gun still pointing forward as though she's still on duty and patrolling her waters.
Well, we've now found the Johnston. And then the following year, because we had a little bit of extra time, we went back and we were unbelievably lucky in being able to find the Samuel B. Roberts, the Sammy B. And that is now the deepest shipwreck in history. And that was even harder to find than the Johnston, because we had no guide to find us, like the debris field that Vulcan found and then the trench going down to the main wreck. This was pure white sheet. Let's try and find this wreck. And we did. Sometimes I would be asked, why do you spend all this time and these resources to go and look for these wrecks on the bottom of the ocean? And I think the answer for me, and I think it's a good one, is the fact that it is part of our history. And having these vessels, vanish in battle, never to be found, is a bit disconcerting to the families, and it doesn't pay proper tribute to the sacrifice of the men who perished on them. In finding the wrecks, I discovered that we give some degree of closure to the families and friends of those who lost people on the ships, but it also allows us the opportunity to retell the story of their heroic fights. And it was amazing how few people knew anything about the Johnston or the Sammy B or the Minerve and the brave people that served on them. And we were able to retell their amazing stories. And human beings live on visual aspects as well as stories. And this combines those two things and gives us more pride in our heritage, shows that people are capable of extraordinary things. And I think it's something I'd love to keep doing so we can keep retelling these important stories to everyone.
There's moral and practical to what we do for history in the Navy. And the moral is that, if you expect sailors to fight and die for this country, then the least we can do is remember them. And every memorial service to sailors who are lost at sea and lost in battle, the Navy makes a promise to their family that we won't forget. And so my job as a director of Naval History and Heritage Command is to, make sure the Navy keeps its promise. And, if I think it matters to sailors today to know that if they go into battle, it's going to matter and they're going to be remembered, no matter what happens.
I mentioned that I find it very important to be able to retell the stories of these heroic vessels in their battles by looking for the wrecks and bringing back the visual record of them at the bottom of the ocean. If you can't do that, like me, which most people can't, you can always go to the museums that show these vessels. And I think it's very important about preserving these vessels, whether it be USS Kidd or the destroyer escort Slater or the USS Texas in my home state of Texas and visiting them and seeing them. Because while it's not exactly the same as seeing the actual ships that went down, you can get a feeling for the men and women who served on these vessels during wartime and what it was like. And that also allows for the retelling of their incredible stories and our heritage. I've lived my life with tremendous respect for any military, that anybody's willing to serve our country. It's something that's ingrained into me, and I think everyone does heroic acts, but I've had one hero my entire life, and it was my dad.
Bravery is oftentimes a relative thing or a lucky thing or whatever. It's just a mystery. Fear is a mystery. The smarter you are, I think, the more you can cope with it. But it's a great mystery.